so internal account systems and control. So obviously this is one of the mandatory units at level 4. I'm guessing that most of you on this session will already know that. For those who maybe don't, it is one of 3 mandatory units that you need to complete at level 4. And traditionally, the way that we would look at it is that if it runs through a pathway, it would almost follow on from business environment at level 2 and business awareness at level 3. So we're taking those and obviously taking it one step further and adding definitely some new topics in there. Now, traditionally, I appreciate this is one that a lot of students aren't too keen on because of the written elements, and we'll be talking a lot about that within this session. That is really going to be the focus, and just giving you some tips and tricks that I would sort of recommend when you're completing the exam for this one as to how you pick up those marks. So what we'll do is we'll start off by just sort of looking at an overview of the exam. If you've got questions, by the way, do pop them in the chat. I'll be stopping at certain points and I will answer anything that comes up. Okay, so let's just have a look at a quick exam overview and then we'll get into the detail of some of the tasks. So there are 5 tasks in total, 100 marks, 2.5-hour exam. 3 written tasks, and as I say, there are 5 in total. So 1 and 3 are going to be multiple choice, and as you see, that worth a total of 35 marks, and then 2, 4 and 5 will all have written elements to them. So it doesn't mean that the entire task will be written, but quite a significant proportion of the task will be down to your written answers. So within this session, I'm realistically going to be focusing on tasks 2, 4 and 5, the written elements, because I know in general, they are the ones that people want the help on more than the multiple choice. Task 1 and 3, if we look at the examiner's report, they are well answered tasks in general. Please don't sort of sit on them because they are still worth a lot of marks. And if you are very close to that 70%, having a strong result on those multiple choice elements will often carry you through. So don't sit on them. But as to where I can help the most, it is probably going to be on these written questions. Okay. So I can't cover obviously absolutely everything, but I will be covering the key points from each task and we'll see what we think, and we'll be having a look at some examples. Okay. So we'll start out then with task 2. So this is, I would say that the 2 that are traditionally the most challenging are task 2 and task 5. Now, task 2 is all related to fraud. And if you've watched my fairly recent mock walkthrough on this, you'll know that I spoke about this, throughout that, where the whole task, even if it doesn't specify within one of the questions, so, part A or part B, it might not necessarily specify that it is on fraud, but let me tell you, it is. Right at the top of task 2, it states that the entire task is related to fraud. So even though, as I say, it might not say it specifically within, part A or part B, please still, when you're writing out your answers, refer them back to fraud. Now, there can be a few things that could come up on this particular task, but one of the main ones would be identifying what fraudulent risks or what could create an opportunity for fraud within a given scenario. So what I've done is I've created a scenario, and I apologize for on a couple of these slides because there will be a lot of words which can be a bit overwhelming, but equally it is somewhat representative of what you can see in an exam, which is why I've gone for that method. So although it looks a little bit overwhelming, we'll work through it, and honestly, it's not too bad. So let's bring up the scenario. So I'll just read this out to you. It will not take very long. So cash registers are shared between the team. Each member of staff picks up a fob to get into the till at the start of their shift, and these are not unique to the individual. Cash registers are reconciled at the end of each day by Tom. Bank deposits made by Tom 4 to 5 times per week, and Sarah does not check whether the deposit slips match the sales reports. Inventory tracking is largely manual, and a full count is performed every 6 months. CCTV cameras are installed but cover only the sales floor and entry points. There's no camera on the cash handling area or stockroom. The financial oversight is minimal, and Sarah relies almost entirely on Tom's weekly emailed summaries of sales, cash deposits, and expenses. Okay, so I've given you there really the highlights of a scenario. And when you're reading through these initially, I would be mentally sort of picking out certain areas that I think could create, as I say, an opportunity for fraud. Now, in terms of when I'm marking these for students, there's a few areas that I see people lose marks on. Now, one of those is writing about accounting weaknesses rather than opportunities within a system that create, the opportunity for fraud. Now, writing about accounting weaknesses is what we'll be covering in task 4. But for task 2, this needs to be worded specifically around fraud. So please bear that in mind when you're writing out your answers. Now, one of the other things that when I'm talking to people, especially on some of the group sessions that I've done, one of the issues that people seem to find is they can almost talk me through what a weakness might be, and then it comes to writing it down and they really struggle. And I know that there will be people guaranteed on this session that feel the same way. They can pick the weaknesses out, but transferring that to paper is much more challenging. So what I want to do is I want to have a look at how I would recommend you wording your answers to maximize the chances of getting full marks. Okay, so I'm going to give you for each of these 3 different answers, and I'm going to talk through the likelihood of potentially getting a mark and why there might be problems. So what I've done is I've picked up on what I believe would be the first weakness. So this is an extract from the scenario we've just looked at. So cash registers are shared between the team. Each member of staff picks up a fob to get into the till at the start of their shift. These are not unique to the individual. So the first thing that we will more than likely have to do is identify what is creating this opportunity for fraud. Now, I see varying answers with varying details on this, but let's have a look at what we might see and what I would recommend. So it's worth saying there is some control here because they do have to have a fob in order to get into the till. However, the problem comes the fact that it's not unique to that individual. That's where your opportunity for fraud comes in. Okay, so let's have a look at some possible answers. So answer 1, no individual till fobs. Now, I cannot say for definite whether you will or will not get the mark for just writing this, but I would say that you're definitely playing roulette by literally stating just these 4 words. I think as an examiner, I would look at that and think, A, is it a little bit generic? Is this something that they've seen before? And does that really identify what's creating the problem? When we're identifying, yes, it doesn't need to be You don't need to write loads, but you need to identify with a purpose. It can't just be such a small statement, because that doesn't give us a lot to mark, does it? Now, answer number 2, and this is where I say we're getting there at this point. We could say no individual till fobs, which may lead to staff stealing from the till. A little bit better. We're getting there now. Now, my problem with this statement is that having no individual till fobs does not enable a staff member to steal from the till, because anyone could steal from the till. You could have individual till fobs. That doesn't stop somebody from stealing. I want to be making as clear as possible to the examiner what is creating the opportunity. And remember, as part of the fraud triangle, for somebody to commit fraud, part of that needs to be that they feel that they can get away with it. Okay. So answer number 3, and this is what I would write if I was answering this. I would say something on the lines of there's no individual till fobs, which may lead to staff stealing from the till. Due to these fobs being generic and not traceable to a staff member, it would be very difficult for the business to know who had taken the money. So 3 different answers to the same point here, but one of them, answer number 3, I can guarantee you're getting the marks from something like that. Okay, even if it's just worth 1 mark, I would generally still write that much in order to cover that 1 mark, because it makes it extremely clear to the examiner, I know exactly what is creating the opportunity and why. Okay. So from here, usually what I would expect to see is some sort of mitigation. What could the business do in order to prevent this from happening? Okay, so the same point that we're dealing with, but this time the mitigation. So I've explained, I've identified what the problem is, sorry. Now I need to explain what the mitigation could be. So again, 3 answers. Answer 1, give staff individual fobs. Now, actually, this is a great start. It's not quite enough, I would say, but something that I've seen quite often with these is people do actually ignore the obvious. They try and go about something in a very complex way. I've seen answers on biometrics. I've seen retinal scanners. I've seen all sorts to access a till. You don't necessarily need to go that far. You know, I'm not saying you wouldn't get the marks, but let's not ignore the obvious. The problem is that these fobs aren't individual. Let's make them individual. So it's not quite enough, this answer, but we're on our way. So answer number 2, give staff individual fobs to the cash registers that are traceable to the specific staff member. Now, I would say that you would get the marks here for answer number 2. I personally will always take it just 1 step further, and this is not waffling by any means. I don't want you to waffle. I still want you to keep it to the point, but I could add a little bit more, and that will absolutely ensure that I get this mark. So answer number 3, give staff individual fobs to the cash registers that are traceable to the specific staff member to show who was on which till and the times that they signed in and out of that till. So that is very, very clear mitigation. Now, I've not gone into the next part, which I'll obviously talk about following this, but that is extremely clear as to what action the business could take to mitigate this fraudulent opportunity. Now, the last step will usually be some sort of why. So why will that mitigation stop the opportunity for a staff member or for an individual to commit fraud? So again, 3 separate answers. We've got 1, fobs are then traceable. So It's very true. Nothing wrong with that. But again, probably not quite enough. If we think about answer 1 from all 3 sections, we'd have wrote around 12 words for 3 marks. I would question whether that is enough. Okay, so we need a little bit more detail in there. So answer number 2, and again, we're on our way. We might get the mark here, but we might not. So staff members could then be traced back to the tills that they were using. Very valid point. We are starting to see why the mitigation that we put in place would work. But to secure the mark, let's just take that one step further and say something on the lines of staff members could then be traced to the till that they were using and at what time. If cash were to go missing, it will be easier for the business to identify who'd taken it. It would also deter staff members as they'd know that they were being monitored. Okay. So that is 3 separate answers. So we've identified, we've explained the mitigation, and we've explained why that would help. All in all, if I take answer 3 from each of those, I've still not written that much. That is far from waffling. Okay, we've still kept it very clear and to the point, but we have made it. We've given it enough detail to sort of show the examiner that you really understand what is being asked of you. So as I say, that is the level of detail that I would go into, that I would recommend at least that you go into to get full marks. So hopefully that does give you an idea. I've obviously only picked one point here, which is around these till fobs, but the same principle would apply to all, 3 or 4 weaknesses, however many were asked of you. I would apply the same rules to each one. I'd write, a similar amount for each one. Right. Okay, hopefully that has helped. I do have another bit on task 2, and then we'll stop for questions. So the next bit that we have for task 2 that I'm sure, again, many of you will be aware of is something to do with a fraud matrix. And again, not the most popular one from feedback. Now, there is something on the Lifelong Learning portal under the real life scenarios that I would highly, highly recommend that you look at for this exam. And this gives you some examples of scenarios that would fall within a fraud matrix, and you can practice rating them. Now, there is a small difference between a risk matrix and a fraud matrix. But realistically, the key part is that the fraud matrix is specifically trying to find flaws within your system, within the business's system, that create an opportunity for fraud rather than general risks. For example, in a risk matrix, you might have it covers loads. It might cover, fire risks, data breaches, absolutely loads. Whereas a fraud matrix is covering specifically areas that could create an opportunity for fraud. Now, on here, I've got a few different scenarios, and I want, for you to be able to see just a few examples of what maybe a medium risk would look like, what a low risk would look like, and what a high risk would look like, and how they could appear within an exam. So usually we would have to rate these risks either, as I say, low, medium, or high. Now, for something to be classed as low risk in a fraud matrix, there has to basically be very, very little, and I mean basically nothing that could go wrong. It's a very low bar. Okay, and I'll try and show you this as an example. So let's have a look at the first scenario. The business has recently lost a member of its finance team, but due to a poor performing couple of years, they have decided not to replace the staff member. This has left them with only one member of the team trained to do the business payroll. So this finance team has somebody now who is trained to do payroll, but there is just the one person. Now, as a risk to the organization from a fraudulent perspective, I would say that that would fall under the medium category. Because if that person, for example, were to go on annual leave or go on long-term sick, for example, that happens to fall over multiple weeks and therefore the payroll might not get done, for example, they don't have the replacement staff member anymore to be able to complete that. So that would fall as a medium risk. Scenario 2, after a recent internal audit, the business was recommended to change its finance systems, responsibilities to increase segregation of duties. Previously, the same member of the team was entering invoices, running the payment runs and doing the bank reconciliation. These processes have now been split between 3 different members of staff. So prior to this internal audit that was completed, I would say that this risk would have been high. No segregation of duties between those processes creates a very high risk for an organization. And obviously we know that for some businesses, it's just not feasible to split it between 3 people because they don't have the staff. But if they can, then that would be rated, I mean, even if they couldn't, it would be rated as high. There's just not a lot that they could do about it. But if they can, then it should be split. Now, because this process has been split between 3 different members of staff, it would be now downgraded from high to low. They've resolved the issue. It's been split out, not just to 2, but to 3 different members of staff, taking it down to low. Now, the last scenario, if it'll appear, there we go. There are no profiles on the finance system to restrict access to any of the areas of the system. This allows staff to easily cover each other's roles. Now, because anyone can access any area of the system, again, it probably means that traceability or audit trail becomes harder. We know that usually certain areas of the finance system shouldn't be accessible to everyone within finance, for example, payroll. So because of that, straight away, I would say that that is a high risk. Okay. So for task 2 there, we've covered some scenarios that you could get for a fraud matrix. We've obviously covered how to identify, show the mitigation and explain the mitigations as to how they would work for task 2. There are a couple of other things that could come up. You could be asked to do the fraud matrix in a slightly different way. You could be asked, for those of you who are already aware of it, you've got monitor, review, report that could come into this task as well, which I've not got a specific example on within this session because we've obviously only got an hour and I want to cover the other tasks as well. But I do have a separate video purely on monitor, review and report that you could watch after the session if you want some extra tips on how to approach those questions. Okay, that is probably a good point to stop. Jaden, do we have any questions?
Hello. So we do have one so far, but of course, again, just want to reiterate, if you guys do have any questions, feel free to get them in the comments. But we have one from Lacra Miura. She's asked, would you recommend combining multiple weaknesses in one answer?
No, I wouldn't. So I would usually what you will get is, or the way it's been displayed from what I've seen in the past is, from mock exams. The way I've seen it in the past is that you will need to separate each weakness out and then be very clear as to what the mitigation would be for that weakness and why it would help. The problem with combining the weaknesses is then if you then go into the mitigations, it's not clear to the examiner which mitigation matches what opportunity is being created. And because the question will specify, you know, identify 4 weaknesses, like say if they're in separate boxes, for example, or if they're not, just make it very clear. I would go with something like, the first weakness is this. This is the mitigation. This is why that will help. Then I would go, this is weakness number 2. So it makes it very, very clear when marking it, which one you're talking about. Okay, hopefully that does answer that one.
Perfect. All right, let's give it a few more seconds just to see if anything comes through. Yeah. But if not, we can go ahead and proceed. No, I think we're good. Of course, again, if any do come through, I will collate them for you.
Yeah, no problem at all. So that does finish this section on task 2. If obviously you do think of anything, even while I'm going through the other tasks related to this, just pop it back in the pop it in the chat, because there will be more opportunities. I'll be stopping, you know, a couple more times to see if we've got any questions. Okay, so moving on to task 4 then. So task 4 generally is very well answered. So it is the strongest written answer. And I think that's because it relates to accounting weaknesses rather than ones that could create an opportunity for fraud. And I think as accounting students, you've been trained throughout, you know, your level 2 and level 3 to, you know, have that mindset related to basically purely accounting. So when they've thrown this fraud section in, it has thrown people a little bit. However, when I, as I say, run the sessions that I've done, the group sessions on this and marking people's mock exams, people are very, very good generally at identifying the accounting weaknesses. So we won't spend quite as long on this one, but I still want to show you some tips. So and talk about some areas that I would avoid. So firstly, what I was going to say is I would very much separate task 2 and 4 in my head, because although both could potentially be on identifying weaknesses, they are from 2 different perspectives. As I said, task 2 is very much fraud based. Task 4 is you're looking at a business's processes. That could be, you know, stock, which we're going to be looking at here. It could be in payroll, something like that. It could be in month-end processes, for example, and you are identifying why they might be weak from an accounting perspective. So where you can, I would avoid talking about fraud in this task. If you're really stuck, put it. You're not going to lose marks, but where you can, I would try to avoid it. And I'll show you in the example that I've got how to sort of spin it from one to the other. So just having a look at this scenario, again, I've just taken really an extract here from a business. So store managers monitor stock visually and decide when to reorder items. Orders are placed by email or phone directly with suppliers, often without purchase orders. The purchasing department is notified after the fact to formalize the order in the system. And then in terms of receiving inventory, when goods arrive at the store or warehouse, employees check the delivery against the supplier's delivery note. Items are recorded manually on paper, receiving logs, and later entered into the inventory system by the clerks. Damaged or missing items are not always reported formally. Now, let's say, for example, you needed to pick 4 weaknesses here within an accounting system. What I would say is often within the scenarios, there will be more than 4. So don't pick the first 4 that you see. Pick the 4 that you are going to find the easiest to write about. Because it's all well and good, as I say, picking the first 4 because you've identified those as weaknesses. But it may be that when you actually get into the thick of it and you're writing your answers out, you realize, I don't really know how to word this one. I know it's a weakness, but I'm struggling to put that into words. Whereas there might be a weakness a little bit further down that you think, actually, I could write about that one really easily. Okay. So with that in mind, let's pick one of these out and have a look at how to sort of write about it. So we've picked out this one. Store managers monitor stock visually and decide when to reorder items. So you could, and I've seen this sort of thing before when marking these, you could say managers may be over ordering stock and stealing the additional stock that isn't needed. But I would, as I say, try to avoid sort of relating this back to fraud. But to reiterate, if you're really struggling, still do it because you may get the marks. But where you can, avoid doing that. Now I'm going to take the exact same point, but this time we'll spin it towards an accounting weakness. So we can say managers may be over ordering stock due to the process being to monitor stock visually. This may lead to stock not being sold, leading to longer inventory holding periods and increased storage costs. So that way I have related it purely to an accounting problem rather than to an opportunity of staff theft. Okay. So when you're writing about these, that is the approach that I would personally recommend. Now, in terms of, the mitigation, or it might not be a mitigation, it could be impact, which we wrote about briefly there. We've said longer inventory holding periods, increased storage costs. If the last step was to make a recommendation, we would just say something on the lines of the business needs to introduce a new ordering process or inventory monitoring process where this is done through a system that logs all sales so they know what inventory is leaving the warehouse, and any purchases, it's logging what's coming in. Okay, so when you're doing these, my main tips, as I said, are pick out the weaknesses firstly that you feel most confident about writing about, and then make sure when you're answering them, because this is the only other area that I've seen people lose marks on, make sure that you are answering the exact question that is being asked. So I've seen issues in the past where it might state at the top of the question that you are analyzing a business's ordering process or ordering an inventory process. And they start talking about other areas of the business that are not related to that ordering process. So just make sure that your answer is very much tailored towards what the question is asking. And then the other point would be, just check within the question whether it's asking you to identify a weakness and then the impact of that weakness, or whether it's asking for an impact and recommendation and why that recommendation would help. It's subtle differences, but it will actually change the way you answer the question. And if you don't pick up on that, you probably won't get the marks for it, because you're almost, it's almost the problem with doing many of these tasks that you almost answer what you've done before, and there's every chance they've changed what they're asking ever so slightly, and that change should actually change the way you're answering the question. So don't lose marks over something quite simple. Okay, Jaden, I just want a quick check-in. I'm not sure there'll be many more questions there, but just a quick check-in on that one before we then move on to task 5.
So we do have 2 questions actually, although I think one of them was from task 2. So Lisa asked, how many weaknesses are there generally in this question? I think she might be talking about task 2, but
yeah, no, four usually. There are 4, but as I said, there could be 6 or 7 within a scenario. But you need to be specific. Obviously ask for 4, give 4. Don't give 5, don't give 3, give 4 weaknesses. And if it doesn't specify the number, that's where you need to almost look at the marks available and try and match up your answer to that mark. So, if there's 12 marks available, it could be that you've got 4 weaknesses, then 4 impacts and 4 recommendations. So 1 mark for each point on each weakness. Okay, but fingers crossed, it does tell you how many you need to note down. But if it doesn't, as I say, match up the marks to how many points you should be making.
Nice. All right. And the second question is by Kirsty, and she's asking, do you get the scenarios before the exam, or is everything received on the day?
So there is pre-release material to give you, and that's available now. And that gives you a little bit of background on the business, but that is all it is. It is just a bit of background. I wouldn't say it would help significantly in your exam, but for those people who maybe worry about what business it's on, it just gives them maybe that little bit of reassurance. So it is worth a read through, but in terms of on the day, that's where all the questions will be asked, and you won't get to see any of those beforehand.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. All right. So those were the 2. Oh, Sabrina was asking, where is that found? The pre-release materials in the learning portal.
It is in the learning portal, yeah. So when you go into the learning portal, I believe under the mock exams section under this unit, so go to internal accounting systems and control, and then I believe it's under the mock exams, you've got the pre-release material. It says something like pre-release for live assessments or something like that.
Yes, indeed. We do have a couple of more questions. Was there more that you wanted to go through, or should we hold off on these? What do you want to
do? We've got time.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Celia is asking for, in task 4, should we state the weakness, then impact, and then each answer before mentioning the second weakness?
Yes, that is what I would do, because usually the format or the layout of how the question is asked will be that to make it clear which weakness you're talking about, it will be state the weakness again, then state the impact, and then potentially resolution or just explaining the impact on the business. But that should be made very clear within the question itself.
Nice. Okay. All right. And final one, I believe, Jane is asking for this question, so task 4, how many marks do you think that it will be? So
it's 15 in total. Now, it could be that the written element is, for example, 12, and then you have, a small multiple choice after it. But we don't know the exact split because it will vary exam to exam. The total marks for the question will remain the same, but obviously we don't know what's going to come up in the live exam in terms of the split of marks within the question itself, within, question 4, task 4.
Okay. Perfect. All right. Yeah, I think that is all of them for now.
Excellent. Okay, let's move on then to task 5. So task 5, I would expect to see, again, just taking from the examiner's report, mock exams, etc. We're looking at either a SWOT, a cost benefit, or a PESTLE analysis. Now, within this session, I'm going to focus on SWOT and cost benefit. And purely the reason why I've done that is because PESTLE does come up within business awareness at level 3. So I'm hoping you have a better idea on how to approach that anyway. Whereas SWOT and cost benefit are definitely newer to most people. You might have seen bits on it before, but generally they are newer. A little bit more on SWOT, cost benefit, definitely new. Okay, so let's start out with the SWOT analysis then. So SWOT analysis, obviously I'm not going to go through entirely what a SWOT is, but to give you a brief overview, SWOT analysis identifies strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to a business. We generally say that strengths and weaknesses are internal. So it is what processes or what that business does that is particularly strong, what makes that business great. The weakness, again, is internal. So, what is that business specifically doing that's poor, that could be improved? We can often turn that weakness into an opportunity, but this is where the external elements come in. So I would say something on the lines of, whether that can be getting contractors in to improve certain areas or new systems, whether that, be IT systems, whether you could get an audit to come in and an auditor, do an internal audit, something like that. They are external things to hopefully resolve a weakness. Okay, not always, but that's generally the easiest way of doing it. Threats generally are the hardest, but they are external. So thinking about, market changes, government policies that are changing, competitors, something that could threaten the business, legislation changes, regulation changes, something that could have an impact on the business from an external perspective. So let's bring up a scenario. And again, I apologize because obviously this is quite wordy, but we'll go through it because this is what we could get. So Hawkins Limited is a mid-sized clothing chain with 12 retail outlets and an online store. Over the past 5 years, the company has seen steady revenue growth thanks to strong brand recognition in local markets and a loyal customer base. However, profitability has not kept pace with sales because of rising operating costs and inefficiencies. The company currently uses manual spreadsheets and basic accounting software to track inventory and sales. Store managers often place orders directly with suppliers, leading to duplicate purchases and overstocking, while some popular items frequently sell out. Online and in-store inventories are not integrated, frustrating customers who order products online only to find them out of stock. Financial reporting is also a challenge. Monthly reports are delayed, limiting management's ability to make timely strategic decisions. Additionally, internal controls are weak. The same staff often handle ordering, receiving, and recording of inventory, raising risks of fraud and errors. Okay, let's have a look then. So we'll start out, strengths. People generally do their best on strengths. So this is something that the business is doing really well on. So here we've got about this strong brand recognition in local markets. So we could say something on the lines of strong brand recognition and customer loyalty. And we just need to explain that from there. So Hawkins has built up a reputation for affordable, stylish apparel and maintains a loyal customer base across both retail and online channels. Okay, so we don't need to write absolutely loads. We've said what the strength is. We've explained why it is a strength. Looking at between 2 and 3 marks for something like this. Next one then, the weakness. There were a few weaknesses in here, but the one that I sort of wrote about here is the outdated inventory and accounting systems. I specifically did that because that's an easy one to then turn into an opportunity. So I've explained why that's a problem. So reliance on spreadsheets and basic software leads to duplicate orders. They've said it themselves within the scenario, inaccurate stock levels and delayed reporting. So again, another 2 marks. We said the weakness, we've explained why it's a weakness. Now our opportunity, we're going to turn that into our weakness into an opportunity. So let's invest in some technology. Let's sort this problem out. So we could implement an integrated retail management system. And that would, obviously, as it says there, covering point of sale, inventory, purchasing and accounting. And this could improve the accuracy, reduce costs, and enable real-time decision making. So that is external to the business. We'd have to get that software in from, they're not going to build it themselves, you know, they will bring that in from another business to improve or to mitigate that weakness. Now, the threat, I've gone with this, I've said intense competition from the fast fashion chains. So think about this business. This is a mid-sized clothing company with retail outlets, which we know are expensive to run. And they also have an online store. Now, it states right here that profitability has not kept pace with sales because of rising operating costs and inefficiencies. Now, a lot of that is, you know, operating costs is due to the fact they've got these stores. Now, that can be great for branding, but we know a weakness is that is higher operating costs. You've got businesses, you know, like I can't name them, Sheen and places like that, where you've got these, you know, very cheap clothing places that it's very hard for a store like this to compete with, obviously on prices specifically. Okay, and again, that's obviously, that is a external thing to the organization. Competition from other people is not an internal thing. So that is how I would be approaching these. Strengths and weaknesses are internal. You're finding something that the business is particularly strong at. Weakness, something they are doing internally, a weakness in their own processes, which is causing problems. An opportunity, what could we do from an external perspective that we could maybe bring in to help mitigate that weakness? And then a threat, something again external that the business needs to consider that they may be competing against or have to change something in the future. Okay, hopefully that has given you an idea of how to approach a SWOT analysis. A lot of this will be practice, having a go, looking for different scenarios, trying to pick these out, and obviously then check into the model answers to make sure that you are on the right lines when answering these. It does tend to be that we see high marks on strengths and weaknesses and the lower marks on opportunities and threats, because they are a little bit harder to identify and, you know, they're a bit more outside the box. Okay, lastly then is a cost benefit. Now, there is something very, very key for a cost benefit, and that is you are always looking for the future. So let's have a look at the scenario first. So Hawkins Limited has been facing issues with inventory accuracy, duplicate orders, and supplier billing issues due to its weak manual ordering and recording process. Management is considering investment in an automated inventory management system that integrates ordering, receiving, and recording within the accounting system. So as I say, everything here that you are looking for needs to be future costs and future benefits. Anything that has already been contracted for the future, or so committed, or anything that has already been spent is irrelevant to a cost benefit analysis. So looking at our scenario then, initial investment, we've got software license and setup, we've got hardware, we've got training for staff. And then we've got ongoing costs, annual maintenance, periodic upgrades every 3 years, 15,000. And then savings, which are going to be our benefits. So we've got reduced duplicate orders, which will lower stockouts and provide additional revenue of 30,000 per year, and reduce fraud through real-time controls, 10,000 per year. Now, these are generally pretty simple. We're just transferring this information into the costs and the benefits. And at the end of it, If the benefits or the savings outweigh the costs, then we've got an overall benefit. Obviously, if the costs outweigh the savings, then we've got an overall cost. So it says produce a cost benefit over a 2-year period. So with that in mind, all we would do, and just be very, very careful of that, because we now need to alter some of these costs, because this is annual maintenance, these are periodic upgrades, and that 10,000 relates to every 2 years. So we would just basically take all our costs and enter them into our costs, which we can see here. We've got software license, hardware, training for staff, annual maintenance. Now this is for a 2-year period, so I've had to double this because this is just for 1 year. And then the upgrades, which it's 10,000 for 2 years, so I can simply put this in at 10,000. And then on the savings, I've obviously had to double these up because they're per year. So 50,000, 60,000 and 20,000. So over a 2-year period, we would have a benefit of 16,000. So as I said, 2 things mainly to watch out for here. Make sure you're doing this for the correct time period. So it could be over a 1-year period, for example. I would have to then halve this one that's for 2 years. So just be very, very aware of that. And then the other thing is, as I said, avoiding any committed costs, even if they're in the future. If they're already committed, we do not take them into account on a cost benefit analysis. And if it's, such as research has been done for £5,000, again, if it's already been done, we do not include it. Okay. So that covers, as I say, I won't have time and knew I wouldn't have time to go through a pestle analysis, but hopefully that gives you an idea of how to answer a SWOT analysis and a cost benefit analysis. So that covers everything that I wanted to go through. Jaden, do we have any questions?
Yes, we do have a couple of questions here. So Jane has asked, for task 5, how many marks are we expecting here? This is the second lowest pass section.
Yes. So we got all the marks at the beginning. It sometimes goes out of my head, but I'll scroll back for you. It won't take me very long. So we got the full breakdown. So 25 marks for task 2 and 5. But again, it doesn't mean that all 25 will relate to written elements, because you can have, some multiple choice thrown in there as well. You've got the ones on task 2, I said, where you've got to identify maybe low, medium or high risks. Obviously that isn't written. So, but the overall task is 25 marks. Okay.
Nice. Yeah, all good. And question we have here from Maltz says, on task 5, when we address the opportunity and threat, do we refer/focus on the weakness identified?
You don't. The thing is, you don't have to, but it's often the easiest way. Okay, so the threat won't be related to that, but the opportunity, you can somehow relate that to the weakness often, but they don't have to be. You could pick a different opportunity if you wanted to. Just make sure that it's external to the organization. It may be that it says somewhere within the scenario that you've had some local stores close to you close. An opportunity might be, could you somehow manage to pick up on their business, something on those lines, which isn't a weakness. It won't have been a weakness that you spoke about, but it's a different way that you could approach it. Okay.
Perfect. All right. I do believe that's all the questions that we've had so far. So yeah, all good. I think this was a really good and really solid session that we had here. Again, INAC is a very, as you said, very word heavy. It's written based. There's a lot that goes on there. So really hoping that this session helped. So gonna start wrapping up now. Will,
yeah.
for your benefit, do you want to tell the people where they can find you, your socials and all of that?
Yeah, so yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you. Hopefully, you can see them at the bottom of the screen. That might be the easiest easiest way
The
to
bottom
see
of the screen does appear to be cut off.
No, that's not what I want. So that, not that that it doesn't matter really. So yeah, I mean, it's just search my name on YouTube. Just search, Will Boardman, or LinkedIn, Instagram, the Facebook group. I've got a Facebook group as well that you can go to. Different ways of reaching me, obviously different content. To what I do, for example, on YouTube. That will be as well. I stay very consistent with YouTube. Instagram has fallen off a little bit, but it will be picked back up very shortly. But all the content that I've done previously is on there for some tips and tricks on certain topics. So
Yep.
just search Will Borden and you'll find me on any of the social platforms.
Look him up and you'll find him. Perfect. And likewise for ourselves, our socials are at your AAT. So that's for Facebook, Instagram, X/Twitter, TikTok, Threads. We're everywhere. You should look us up where you'll be able to find us, no problem. But again, want to thank you all for coming. And yes, it's a great session. And I will see you soon. See you again. See you later.
Thank you all.